And it is now time for private members' business.
Ballot item number 31, Order M86, second reading of Bill 86, an act to enact the Meredith Act, Fair Compensation for Injured Workers 2025, and to repeal the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act 1997. MPP Bourgeois.
I recognize the member from Thunder Bay Superior North.
Thank you, Speaker. I move second reading of Bill 86, an act to enact the Meredith Act, Fair Compensation for Injured Workers 2025, and to repeal the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act 1997.
MPP Bourgeois has moved second reading of Bill 86, an act to enact the Meredith Act, Fair Compensation for Injured Workers 2025, and to repeal the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act 1997. Pursuant to Standing Order 100, the member has 12 minutes for their presentation.
Thank you, Speaker. Bill 86 replaces the 1997 Workers' Safety Insurance Act in order to return the WSIB to its original principles, compensation that lasts for the duration of the injury in a non-adversarial system that puts the well-being of injured workers first, ensuring that the effects of the injury or disease do not become a burden on communities, workers' families, or the public. The subtitle, the Meredith Act, refers to Sir William Meredith, the architect of the original workers' compensation system. His system was based on these principles: no fault, non-adversarial, compensation for as long as the disability lasts, the employer pays, there is collective liability, and the system is administered by an independent public agency. These principles were turned on their heads, however, when the Mike Harris Conservative government replaced the Workers' Compensation Act with the Workers' Safety Insurance Act, marking a clear change of priorities, minimizing costs to employers regardless of the harm caused to workers. This change of focus is evident in the WSIB Commission minutes that discuss employers as their clients without once mentioning injured workers. Think about that. A commission intended to support workers in their time of need that identifies employers as their clients and not workers. So let's look at what the Meredith Act changes, starting with governance. The current WSIB is governed by political appointees as a virtual extension of the Premier's office. Governance is neither independent nor representative. The Meredith Act, on the other hand, sets minimum qualifications for the head of the tribunal and requires that the Commission consist of 14 equal worker and business representatives, with all commissioners nominated by bona fide worker and business groups, including at least one injured worker representative. Compensation. The Meredith Act restores compensation for loss of income to 90% of net earnings. This is a return to the original rate that was cut to 85% by the Harris Conservative government in 1997. The Meredith Act also includes CPP and pension benefits for the first time, ending age discrimination that cuts off permanently injured workers, consigning them to poverty at age 65. The Meredith Act makes compensation for pain, intangible loss, and suffering last as long as the suffering does, and is to be proportionate to the pain, intangible losses, and suffering. The current WSIB system is arbitrary and can be commuted with a one-time lump sum payment, a practice that not only leaves workers far short of what they need to survive, it also skews their income taxes, leaving injured workers worse off in subsequent years. The WSIA system for education and retraining for permanently injured workers is coercive, arbitrary, inadequate, and grossly unrealistic. One of the worst practices of the WSIB is to deem that a permanently injured worker has been re-employed in a phantom job, using this as justification to cut off their compensation, regardless of the facts. Under the Meredith Act, deeming based on fantasy income ends now. Retraining and education must put the permanently injured workers into at least as good a position as they were in before the accident, based on real-world conditions. Under the current Act, there's no time limit for decisions. People can be left dangling with no income, no recourse, and nothing but pain, anxiety, and hopelessness for years on end. The Meredith Act, on the other hand, requires initial eligibility decisions within 15 days. If this deadline is not met, the injured worker is entitled to interim compensation that may not be clawed back if the claim is eventually denied. Under the 1997 Act, the WSIB has an internal appeal process fraught with a fundamental conflict of interest that can take months or even years to resolve before an injured worker can take a dispute to the actual appeals tribunal. Yet when decisions finally get to the appeals tribunal, the WSIB has its decisions overturned in whole or in part 70% of the time. What this tells us is that WSIB workers are being told to deny claims in the hope that people will give up and go away, thus making so-called surpluses bigger. Again, who is the WSIB accountable to? Employers looking for rebates or workers whose lives have been shattered by a permanent injury? Let me tell you about Teddy Bobrowski and his experience appealing his case to the WSIB after severely damaging his back in a construction job. It took 10 years before the WSIB finally granted him compensation. In the meantime, he had no income. He had to sell his house, sell his business. He became drug addicted in his attempts to mask pain and go back to work. He wound up homeless and suicidal. It was only after 10 years that he finally received the compensation he had been entitled to all along. This is what injured workers with complex injuries go through. Teddy, as documented by so many others, wound up with a permanent psychological disability because of what the WSIB put him through. And in that vein, under the Meredith Act, all documents and communications, including internal communications, must be shared with workers launching appeals. This will eliminate covert practices, covert administrative advice documents, covert directives from managers, and other abuses common at the WSIB. Regarding medical privacy, the Meredith Act mandates that the injured worker decides who examines them and makes medical reports. If the Commission wants a second opinion, the injured worker will choose a second examining physician. There will be an in-person physical examination by the second physician, and this physician's first duty will be, as it should be, to the patient, to the worker. Reviews by doctors who have never met with the injured worker and simply decide to overrule the treating doctor's reports are eliminated in the new Act. In addition, non-medical administrators will no longer be allowed to override a medical opinion, although under existing WSI practices, they do this anyway. The WSIB does not currently gather any information from workplace health and safety committees, does not flag problem workplaces, employers, types of accidents, types of diseases, or any other safety-related information for the Ministry of Labour, Health and Safety Services. They also do not track what happens to injured workers over time to see the outcomes of their decisions. The Meredith Act requires the Commission to gather, analyze, distribute information from its own processes, health and safety committees, scientific and medical sources, and to distribute this information widely. If the Commission becomes aware of any safety problem, fraudulent activity, employer claims suppression, suspicious workplace deaths, or serious injuries, they are required to report these incidents to the Ministry of Labour, Health and Safety Services, and to the appropriate police services. Currently, whistleblowers are not protected. The WSIB routinely prosecutes workers for alleged reporting infractions, despite having a vested interest in the outcome of such prosecutions. Under the Meredith Act, the Commission will not have any prosecutorial powers of their own. Finally, the WSIB's system of billbacks, ratings, and rebates that creates an inherent conflict of interest between employers and injured workers needs to end. The notion of returning so-called surplus dollars to employers came out of an amendment the Ford Conservative government made to the WSIA in 2021 when they created a financial incentive for employers to deny, harass, and interfere with injured workers, their medical treatment, and the workers' relationship with compensation. This arrangement has left thousands of workers living in pain and poverty, while companies have been gifted a financial bonanza. Let's take the example of Fiera Foods to show that employers, no matter how notoriously bad their working conditions, still receive rebates. 5 people died while working at Fiera Foods, and yet Fiera Foods received a $45,000 rebate for supposedly having a good safety record. How is this even possible? The Meredith Act ends billbacks, ratings, and rebates and restores the compensation system to one of collective employer responsibility, with premiums based upon the type of industry or business, thus removing the incentive to harass injured workers and deny workplace harms. This may be one of the most important aspects of the Meredith Act, eliminating the experience rating, an incentive for employers to not report incidents, because the fewer incidents, the greater the rebate. Get rid of the rebates. Workers should not be forced into poverty and forced into becoming a public expense. And remember, it is employers who are to fund the support for workers made ill or injured while working for them. It is not the public. These are not taxpayer dollars. But when the WSIB fails in its duty to support injured workers, it forces these workers to become a public expense. In conclusion, the harm to workers has been substantial and is long-standing. Bill 86 is a comprehensive bill, much larger than most private members' bills. It represents years of work by injured worker support groups from across Ontario. It has the support of unions, also from across Ontario, including the Ontario Federation of Labour, the United Steelworkers, the Ontario Nurses Association, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, the United Food and Commercial Workers, and, interestingly and importantly, the Ontario Compensation Employees Union. That is the union that represents workers who work at the WSIB. I especially want to thank Kendall McKinney, the retired lawyer who gave up his summer and probably more to create the language of this bill. It's a very important bill for workers across this province. If you receive an injury, if you break your arm, it's probably not a big deal in terms of getting compensation. But if you have an injury that could be lifelong or could go on for years, you are going to face so many hurdles. You will acquire mental health challenges out of despair, and you will be a pauper. You will be penniless. At best, you'll be able to get some ODSP support, and that is criminal. It is wrong. I urge the government to support Bill 86, the Meredith Act. Thank you.
Further debate? Further debate? I recognize the member from Mississauga Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am proud to rise today to speak to Bill 86. Let's be clear about what the debate is really about. It is about whether injured workers in Ontario have a system they can rely on, not just today, but years down the road. And Speaker, that means one thing. The system has to work, bulletproof. Because whether you are on a construction site building homes and hospitals or working in a care facility supporting vulnerable Ontarians, workers across this province show up every day to get the job done. They do demanding physical work. They take pride in what they build, and they expected one thing in return: safety and security. But even with the best safety measures in place, accidents can still happen. And when they do, the impact does not stop at the work site. It follows a worker home. It affects their lives. It affects their families. their financial security, and their future. And too often, an injured worker is left facing impossible choices between paying the bills or focusing on recovery. That is a choice no worker in Ontario should ever have to make. That's why our government approach is simple. We are focused on protecting Ontario workers with real action, not theoretical overhauls. Because when a worker is injured, they don't need a promise. They need support. They need stability. And they need a system that delivers when it matters most. That's exactly what we have been building. We have strengthened enforcement across the province with tens of thousands of inspections every year. We have cracked down on bad actors who cut corners and put workers at risk. And we have introduced some of the toughest penalties in Canada for employers who break the law. Because protecting workers is not optional, it is a responsibility. That's why we have also modernized workplace safety rules to reflect the realities workers face today. From requiring AEDs on construction sites to ensuring properly fitting protective gears and equipment for every worker, we have taken action to keep people safe on the job. But we also know that when injuries do happen, the system has to be there. That's why we are moving forward with targeted reform to strengthen support for injured workers, including increase the income replacement benefits to 90% of the take-home pay, the first increase in nearly 30 years. Because for the worker recovering from an injury, that's not just a number. That's help with rent, help with groceries, help staying afloat while they focus on healing. We are also modernizing the system to reflect today's workforce, because right now benefits can end at age of 65, even if a worker planned to keep working. That doesn't reflect reality. More Ontarians are working longer, contributing their skills and experience. And a workplace injury should not suddenly matter less because of someone's age. If a worker intends to keep working, they deserve that protection. If a worker, because whether you are a BSW caring for someone in their home or a trade person working high above job site, if you are hurt on the job, this government will be there for you. That's how you build a system that works. Step by step, targeted, responsible. We are focusing on real outcomes for real people. Now, compare that to what's being proposed in Bill 86. That bill doesn't focus on one issue. Instead, it proposed to overhaul the entire system in one shot, without a clear cost, without a clear implementation plan, and without a clear path forward. Speaker, that's not responsible, because the system has to do two things at once. It has to support workers, they are injured, and it has to remain stable so it can continue supporting workers for years to come. That balance matters. That's why our government is taking a direct approach. We are making real improvement where they are needed. By strengthening protections, supporting injured workers, and doing it in a way that keeps the system strong, stable, and sustainable. Because Ontario workers build this province, they build our homes, they build our hospitals, our infrastructure. They show up every day and keep our communities running. And as a government, our job is simple, to have their backs. Because when workers are protected, when they know that this government is in their corner, they can do their job with confidence, with pride, and without fear. And that's exactly what we are delivering as part of our plan to protect the Ontario workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further debate? I recognize the member from, sorry, I didn't see you standing up. I recognize the member from Niagara Falls.
Well, what's interesting about that, the last time I stood up, you didn't see me either. Do you remember that? That was the last time I tried to see you. You said I didn't see you stand up. I'm not that short here. What's going on here? Anyways, it's an honor to stand up and talk to this bill and this act. And I want to congratulate my colleagues for standing up for injured workers. Because I can look, give them a big round of applause. Because I look at the other side, and I'm going to say that I'm a worker. That's all I am. I went to work every day. I worked in General Motors. I worked steady midnights for 20 years. I watched my colleagues get hurt on the job. I don't know how many of these guys have ever worked in a plant. It's dangerous. I don't know how many have worked on a construction site. It's dangerous. But they get hurt on the job. And when they get hurt on the job, they should be compensated. Because when I go to work, I don't want anything but a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. That's what I owe the company. What I don't owe the company is my life, and I certainly don't owe them to live in poverty after I get hurt on the job. And that's what's happening. So I want to compliment the government. I don't do that very often. But they're making some minor improvements. Taking it from 85% to 90% of net income, that's an improvement, one that I can support. But I have to say it went to 85% because of the Mike Harris government under Bill 99, when he took it from 90% back to 85%. So here we are. I think Mike Harris hasn't been in there. Let's see, the Liberals were 15 years. You guys are 8. Over 20 years to go back to 90%, where it was already that in 2010. Think about that. And the one where people are going to now be able, a lot of people are working past 65, let's be honest. And why are they choosing to work beyond 65? Seniors can't afford their rent. They can't afford their groceries. They're being forced to work longer because of the economy, because of some of the choices that are made over there on that side of the house. So that's a good improvement. A good improvement. But what you should do is make sure it's retroactive, so it's covering the people that had to work before. They're not doing that. But when the government stands up and say they care about workers, here's how I feel. You're worker for working bills. We supported every one, I believe. Our Labour critics here, we supported them. But there's one piece when it comes to compensation that this government, even though they've had amendment after amendment, we've gone to committee and we've asked them, sometimes we begged them to get rid of deeming, where a worker gets hurt on the job, no fault of his own. He got up in the morning with his family, had a cup of coffee, went into work. He wasn't going to work to get injured. He was going to work to put in a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, so he goes home to his family. But this day, he goes home to his family, he's injured, probably at the hospital. Maybe hurt his back. Maybe lost an arm. And he's deemed by WSIB. And what happens? He's making $20 an hour. They say this phantom job over here he can do for 17. They cut his benefits. They take that 17 off. And then the amount he's making is obviously $3 an hour. Can't live on it. So he goes on ODSP. Ends up going in poverty. ODSP, couldn't pay the mortgage. Couldn't provide for his family. Couldn't take care of his kids to go to skating. Go to play hockey. Not because he did anything wrong. You know what he did wrong? He went to work because he wanted to provide for his family. That's all he wants to do. That's all I ever wanted to do, provide for my family when I went to work. But when you get injured on the job, all of us on that side of the house, this side of the house, has to make sure that worker's taken care of. No worker in the province of Ontario with this government should end up having to live in poverty because they got hurt on the job and because this government is deeming them. So they can take that money, instead of giving it to that worker, they're giving it to businesses in the form of hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet that worker, who all he did was go to work, unfortunately got hurt on the job. So I'm saying to this government, the two things that you did that I think are going in Bill working for Workers 7, I think we are a good idea. But you can't say, and none of you guys can stand up and say you work for workers or you care for workers if you're not making sure that you get rid of deeming. Because no worker in the province of Ontario should go to work, get hurt on the job, and live in poverty. Should never happen. So I'm saying, I know the House Leader is here, I'm saying to the House Leader, put it in Bill 7, get rid of deeming, take care of workers, because I can't say this any clearer. No worker in the province of Ontario should live in poverty because they get hurt on their job. Thank you very much.
Further debate? Further debate? I recognize the member from York South-Weston.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to speak to Bill 86, the proposed Meredith Act. I want to begin by acknowledging the member opposite and the co-sponsors of this bill. Any debate about how we support people after workplace injury deserves to be taken seriously in this House, and their concerns for Ontario workers' well-being is clear. Because when a worker is hurt on the job, it not only affects the worker, but the loved ones around them. And it's about whether that worker can recover with dignity, support their family, and have the confidence that the systems will be there when they need it most. Speaker, our government agrees with this principle. We believe injured workers deserve real support. We believe the system must be fair. We believe it must reflect the realities of today's labor market. And we believe any proposal that is focused on protecting our workers must be responsible, workable, and built to last. That is exactly what our government has done. Since 2021, Speaker, our government has introduced 7 Workers for Workers Act, delivering more than 130 legislative and regulatory changes to strengthen health and safety protections for our Ontario workers. But we have not stopped there, because in the coming days we'll introduce a new package of measures through our Protect Ontario Workers and Business Plan. That includes even more meaningful, targeted reforms that will strengthen support for injured workers and improve worker protection across this province. And that matters in the context of today's debate. While Bill 86 proposes to reopen the entire workplace safety and insurance framework in one sweeping motion, our government is focused on delivering concrete improvements that reflect the modern working world. Speaker, one of the most significant measures we are proposing would increase the loss of earnings benefits from 85% to 90% of net average earnings. That is real improvement. For an injured worker, that means stronger income protection during recovery. It means more stability while they heal, and it means more support when they need it most. And it brings Ontario more in line with other Canadian jurisdictions that already provide that level of wage replacement. We're also proposing to modernize the system for workers that want to continue to work past the age of 65. Speaker, right now, many injured workers see loss of earning benefits end at age 65, even if they are still working or plan to continue to work. That no longer reflects the reality of Ontario's labour market. More people are choosing to work later in life, often past the age of 65. And if a worker intended to keep working, the system should be able to recognize that. Speaker, that is why our proposed changes would give the WSIB discretion to continue benefits beyond age 65, where it's satisfied that the worker intended to remain in the labour force. That is a targeted change. It's a fair change, and it reflects the modern economy. Speaker, our government is taking action to close long-standing gap in coverage. If you're doing demanding care work in a residential care facility or group home, your access to workplace injury coverage should not depend on the ownership model of your workplace. Our workers' protection should not change simply because the facility is publicly run, privately operated, or structured differently on paper. That is why we're proposing to extend mandatory WSIB coverage to private operated residential care facilities and group homes, so more care workers have access to protection and support they deserve if they are injured on the job. That is practical, Speaker. That is fair. And that is the kind of targeted reform workers need. Speaker, this is the work that's part of a broader mandate, a mandate to protect Ontario's workers. And with the bill we're bringing forward, we're building on that record. We're proposing measures to protect vulnerable workers, including ensuring workers are first in line when recovered wages are paid out and prohibiting employers' charging workers for employer-mandated branded uniforms. That is what action looks like. Now, Speaker, let me be clear that Ontario workers deserve a workplace safety and insurance system that is fair, modern, and sustainable. They deserve meaningful support when they're injured, and they deserve a government that listens, acts, and improves the systems responsibly. That is the approach our government is taking, and that is the work that we are doing. And with that is the lens through which we are approaching Bill 86, Speaker. Thank you.
Further debate? I recognize the member from Ottawa South.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And I'm pleased to rise and speak in support of Bill 86, the Meredith Act. And I want to thank the member from Thunder Bay Superior North, Niagara Falls, members, I should say, and Sudbury for bringing it forward, and especially for all the work that went into creating this bill. It's a lot of work. And I'm going to support the bill. I think it should get to committee. So I don't want what I'm going to say next to be taken as a negative. It's just what I think is something that's obvious. This is a complex piece of legislation. It requires more than 45 minutes of debate. It will require more than just committee work. Right? It will, because one of the challenges that we've had, if you look back in the history, we created workers' compensation so that we protect workers, but also it would protect employers, right? Because our courts would get clogged up, there was no kind of uniformity, and so it was a benefit to both people. This is a large, complex organization to run. And one of the challenges that we had was that financially and administratively, we weren't keeping up, not for the workers and not for the employers, because the risk profiles that we had for certain jobs weren't updated. Right? And sometimes people, and I know this because we were talking about the private members bill for workers in residential care and group homes, their risks were all over the place, but they were literally doing the same work. So what ended up happening is we ended up with a large liability, right? Because partly our premiums didn't keep up, and partly we weren't managing actually what we were paying out. So, and another example I'll give this, and I just things I noticed, and that's why I think that we have to build out the bill. When I look at the governance, I look at that governance, and I don't think 3 years is a long enough term. I think it has to be longer than that. That's not a big deal, but it's just this organization manages billions and billions of dollars. It's complex. It deals with human need, right? It deals with complex situations, and so you have to have the right people. You have to have some corporate memory, and I think that changing that over is not going to help. We have to be careful that the organization doesn't become, I'll use the word bloated, because that's what will happen sometimes in organizations. You have to have some sort of financial, like in terms of administratively, that it's responding to people, but it's also not ineffective, right? It's a big organization. So, having said all that, the things that you're doing in the bill, some of them the government's moved on just recently with the 90% and with talking about retirement. That's a good thing. But the member from Niagara Falls does bring one very, very important point, and that's deeming. And it's not working for people, right? The whole process of deeming. And so that's an important part of this bill. It's something that's driving people who, through no fault of their own, right, are going into poverty. Like I was in the grocery business for 22 years. So I don't want to say dealt regularly with workers' compensation, but it was part of our doing business and reporting, and the impact that workplace injuries would have on some people was really significant. And the instance of people taking advantage of the system wasn't as great as when I got to government that people sometimes said, and sometimes in workplaces people made assumptions about what people were and weren't able to do. But anyhow, just to the point, Most people want to work. Most people want to contribute. Most people want to be fair and on the up and up. They just want to be treated fairly. So I will echo the comments from the member from Niagara Falls with regards to deeming. I do want to take, because I got a couple of minutes, thank the government. I do want to thank the government for, and I know my colleague just mentioned, extending WSIB coverage to workers in residential care and group homes. And this is one of the things that we have to watch. There were people who were doing literally the same work, but because their employer wasn't the province, they weren't getting coverage, which means in these instances, some of those workers worked 2 or 3 jobs. If they didn't have WSIB coverage, they got injured, they only got covered for 1 job, but they needed the other 2 jobs to pay the bills. And these were mostly women in caring for the people we care for most. Toughest jobs, PSWs, DSWs, working with vulnerable populations. And so it was really unfair. And I just want to say this, I'll say it again, I introduced the bill 6 times, debated it twice. We were almost going to debate it a 3rd time until the minister said, we're going to do this. I'd heard it, and I kind of got him in a corner and asked him this. So it's a good thing. So good things can happen. Workers, it's not just, it's about protecting families, right? So I want to thank the members for bringing it forward. I'm glad to support. I'd like to see it. I think, I'm good with getting it to committee. I think it's going to need more than that. But that's not a criticism. That's just a statement of, how important this is, that you have to take the kind of time to make sure that you get the outcome that you want. Thank you, Speaker.
Further debate? I recognize the member from Sudbury.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I want to thank my colleague, our Shadow Minister for WSIB, for her amazing work on this file. Originally, having Labour as my file, there was I keep wanting to use her first name, which we're not allowed to do. And I had recommended that I was going to my colleague for advice so often that she should have the file on her own, and she's done amazing things. And I want to thank the resources and the people in the gallery who've worked with her to bring their voices forward on this very important bill. I reached out. I come out of the Steelworkers Local 6500. We're lucky in a large union like ours. We have 2 full-time compensation officers who work full-time on this, and we don't win as many as we lose. It's an exhausting, frustrating process. So I reached out to my friend Sean Stadden, and I asked him if he wanted to say anything about this, and he gave me a bunch of things to say, but the one that stood out to me most was the only consistency for Ontario miners is consistent denials. I want to say that to the government because you cannot be working for workers if you're not working for injured workers. You cannot stand with mining workers if you're not standing with injured mining workers. You cannot talk about trades workers and the importance of trades workers if you don't fight for injured trade workers. That's important. There has been rebates of over $2 billion. And those rebates came because people who are injured in our workplace, like Wayne in the gallery, because they got ripped off by the WSIB, because they got denied, and because the government that talks about working for workers has a WSIB program that does not work for workers. And so when my colleagues from the Conservative government talk about adjusting and nudging, our shadow minister is talking about giving it a shove so it works properly for our workers, that it supports our workers. SWEAC sent me a quote. They said, "We have supported numerous workers with WSIB issues over the years. Many have had to fight years for their benefits. Finally winning at WSIAT. It shouldn't be so hard for workers to access what is rightfully theirs. Too many others just give up. And instead of being supported through the WSIB system, are supported by taxpayers through social benefits." Bob, who asked me not to use his name because he's worried he'll be denied again, he talked about having to fight WSIB for an active back injury that he has. WSIB keeps telling him to go back to work. He keeps giving them notes from doctors and specialists telling he's still injured and can't even get out of bed. He's terrified he's going to be a burden to his family. Clayton says, "I'm the self-described poster boy for how malicious and organized WSIB is. He's a locomotive operator for one of the largest steel manufacturers in the world. He says, this insurance company is costing me my health, my family has to take care of me. I can no longer even do chores around the house. I have no more friends because I can't do anything with them without complaining about pain and my ability to pull my weight during outings. Living this way since my injury on April 12, 2019 has been the biggest nightmare of my life. 2019. Still no compensation. Still in pain. This isn't something that needs a nudge. This is something that needs a shove. It needs a rehaul. I agree with my colleagues. Let's take this to committee. Let's get it right. But let's stop pretending coloring on the edges or lightly sanding is going to help injured workers in Ontario. You want people to work for critical minerals and mining? You want people to go into the skilled trades? Well, God forbid they talk to their parents who work in those fields. Because my dad, who worked in mining, begged me not to work in mining before I went. And my friends who work in mining, when they talk to their kids, they tell them, you don't want to be choking on this. Because when you get a respiratory disease, a workplace cancer, WSIB will fight you tooth and nail. And right now in my workplace, I know that there's a worker who is hoping he's going to get WSIB before he dies, so his wife and kids will have some coverage. I'm going to sit down and give my colleague time to speak.
Further debate? I recognize the member from Nickel Belt.
J'aimerais remercier la députée pour avoir amené un projet de loi aussi important et pour lequel on a attendu tellement longtemps. La Commission de la sécurité professionnelle et de l'assurance contre les accidents du travail, qu'on appelle la CSPAT en français, est supposée de soutenir les travailleurs travailleuses blessés au travail. Ils doivent couvrir les pertes de salaire, ils doivent couvrir les soins médicaux, ils doivent aider au retour au travail. Il n'y a rien de ça, Madame, qui se passe. C'est le contraire. Comme on a expliqué, pour bien des travailleurs travailleuses blessés, le processus pour venir à bout d'avoir un soutien salarial peut prendre des mois et des années. Dans mon bureau de député, on s'occupe, je ne sais plus comment, on en a de centaines de cas qui ne sont pas syndiqués, qui n'ont personne d'autre pour les aider. Ils viennent nous voir et c'est nous autres qui les aident. Et je vous dis, Madame la Présidente, on ne les gagne pas toutes, on en perd beaucoup, beaucoup. Après avoir attendu pendant des années, si tu finis par être accepté, bien là, tu as ce qu'on appelle la présomption. La présomption, c'est on va te dire, OK, on va t'envoyer prendre un cours pour voir si tu serais capable de faire un travail qui est adapté à le problème physique ou mental que tu as subi au travail. Une fois que tu as fini de prendre ce cours-là, que tu sois capable d'avoir un job ou pas, on va présumer que tu as un emploi et on va limiter le montant de salaire qu'on te donne basé sur un emploi qui n'existe pas. Ce qu'on est en train de faire en ce moment-là, c'est des gens qui n'ont rien fait de mal. Tu ne choisis pas de te faire mal. Tu ne choisis pas d'avoir un accident au travail, mais ça l'arrive. Puis quand ça l'arrive, on a tellement de ces travailleurs et travailleuses-là qui finissent par vivre dans la pauvreté. C'est pas acceptable. C'est pas acceptable. Le projet de loi 86 sur la loi Meredith nous offre une opportunité de changer ça. On veut tous que les travailleurs et travailleuses soient traités avec respect. On a l'opportunité de faire ça. Votons en faveur de la loi 86 qui a été apportée par ma collègue. Merci.
Further debate? I recognize the member from Guelph.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise today to speak in favor of Bill 86, the Meredith Act. I want to thank the members from Thunder Bay, Superior North, Sudbury, and Niagara Falls for bringing this important legislation forward. Sometimes, and it's often not when we're debating private members' bills, but today's one of those times, where you debate a PMB that talks about what kind of society you want to live in. Do we want to live in a society where people who go to work, do a fair day's job, ask for fair wages to take care of their family, and when they get hurt and they can't go home that day, their family faces poverty? And that happens too many times in this province. I've met with too many injured workers who can't get compensation, who can't get through the appeals process, who get deemed and live in poverty. Is that really the kind of Ontario we want to live in? Is that the message we want to send to our kids when we tell them, you know what, get a good job, work hard, play by the rules, and you'll get ahead? But if you get injured, at no fault of your own, that's not going to happen. I want to give a shout out to somebody by the name of Paul Taylor. Paul and I ran against each other a few times in Guelph. We had some pretty good campaigns together. And I learned to respect Paul almost more than anyone I've ever run against. Paul was a truck driver, hurt his back driving a truck, a debilitating injury, fought WSIB to get compensation, finally got training to transition into information technology, but he was colorblind. And it turns out he couldn't do that job. And WSIB said, sorry, we trained you. You should be able to do this job. We're not going to recognize your disability. And if you can't do the job, you're out of luck. So Paul was part of a group of people to start the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Group, a fantastic group of individual workers who have said, you know, this may have happened to us, but we're going to fight like, you know what, to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. And this is what Bill 86 is all about. I can't tell you how many people come into my office and ask for help to navigate a broken appeals process that this bill addresses. I can't tell you how many people come into my office and tell me their doctor tells them they can't work. And yet WSIB forces them to go see some phantom paper doctor who doesn't even examine them and says, oh, you can work and so you can't get compensation. This bill addresses that. I can't tell how many people come to my office and say, I'm being told by WSIB there's this other job that exists, but I can't do it. Or if I do it, I get paid at a way lower wage. That's the practice of deeming. This bill addresses that. The member opposite earlier in debate said, if you're injured, this government will have your back. I can't tell you how many injured workers in this province that right now in Ontario the government doesn't have their back. And how does it feel to be one of those injured workers when $2 billion are sent back to employers instead of providing compensation for workers who deserve it, who are being forced to live in poverty? And imagine if it happened to any one of us or any of our kids that worked hard, got hurt, and now they can't support their families. And I can tell you as a small business owner, I was a long-time small business owner before I got into politics. I paid WSIB. And I can tell you as a small business owner, I'd like to get some rebate money back, but not at the expense of my fellow Ontarians who are having to live in poverty because they got hurt on the job. That's what society is about. You know, when there's a big sign that says Protect Ontario, yeah, we need to protect Ontario from the unhinged tariff wars coming from south of the border. But part of protecting Ontario is making sure we're there when our fellow citizens need us. And right now, injured workers need us. And that's exactly why we should vote in favor of this bill, because they deserve a government and a province that cares about them, that's going to take care of them. Thank you, Speaker.
Further debate? Further debate? Further debate? I recognize the member from Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I want to begin by thanking my colleagues from Sudbury, Niagara Falls and Nickel Belt for their support. And I also want to thank the member from Ottawa South for his comments and the member from Guelph for his comments. Listening to the government side, you would think that they actually supported the bill. But they do not have the backs of workers, and they need to start listening. The reason that we did such a comprehensive bill is because the system has been so distorted, out of shape, that workers are being abandoned and forced into poverty, forced onto the public purse, while corporations are getting billions of dollars that should be going to those workers. It is completely distorted. It is wrong. And then the government talked about the fines, these big fines. Those fines are meaningless because if they aren't applied or they're so small, it's just the cost of doing business. So think of Fiera Foods. If Fiera Foods can get a rebate of $45,000 after 5 people died working at Fiera Foods, then there are no guardrails. That just means that money is a slush fund that's going back to employers no matter how bad they are treating their workers. And the system is designed to pit workers against employers because it has been set up with this experience rating. So that needs to end. The government could do something for injured workers by taking the things seriously that are in this bill, move it to committee, say yes. The work has been done. Stand up for workers. It's not enough. You are just allowing lives to be destroyed and pretending it's not happening. It is happening. The WSIB is not consistently serving the interest of workers, particularly those with permanent injuries. You need to support Bill 86. Thank you.
The time provided for private members' public business has expired. MPP Vaugeois has moved second reading of Bill 86, an act to enact the Meredith Act, Fair Compensation for Injured Workers, 2025, and to repeal the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, 1997. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? No. All those in favour of the motion will please say aye. Aye. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Nay. In my opinion, the nays have it. A recorded vote being required, it will be deferred until the next instance of deferred votes.